Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Wednesday, December 4th. Today, we have a huge show for you. We're going to be focusing on a couple of different sports, starting off with college football. The new playoff rankings, the final regular season one has come out. We'll talk about what that means as we head into college football championship week. We'll also talk about some crazy chaos playoff scenarios for those teams that are on the bubble in college football. Then we turn our attention to the NBA. NBA power rankings every Wednesday, as always, as well as a look at the NBA Cup. The final 8 teams have been set. All of the group rounds are done. We'll talk about what that bracket looks like and who might advance to win the second ever Cup, the second ever NBA Cup. Finally, ending in baseball, a brand new proposed rule from Commissioner Rob Manfred. We'll talk about what the Golden at Bat rule is, whether or not it's a good idea, and what it means for the future of baseball. We'll talk about all of that and more in just a second. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Wednesday, December 4th. But like I was saying, we are going to start off our show here today in the world of college football. Another wild week has led to yet another college football playoff ranking. We're here to react to it. 25-1, starting from the bottom in this group that I'm gonna call the little bottom group of 5 group right there. Memphis is someone that I threw in there at the bottom of my list as well. Army, a team I don't think really should have gotten in there. They dropped Tulane from the rankings. Texas A&M and Kansas State both fell. All 3 of those fell from the rankings after last week's performance. All 3 of those took brutal losses. I'm a little surprised that Army is still in there. Not that it really matters that much, but I am a little bit surprised that Army is still in there at 24. Colorado moves up a couple spots to 23. Syracuse all the way up to 22. I'm glad they're getting some respect. That's a team that I have been a lot higher on for a while. I'm glad they're getting some love after a huge win over Miami. UNLV at 20. They're a team that has a real shot. Win and you're into the college football playoff. Missouri, another team that I don't think they really should be this high up, but 9-3 SEC squad, to each their own. BYU is a team that should maybe be a little bit higher. At 10-2, I feel like they're getting a little bit of disrespect. Yes, they lost to Kansas, but they've also taken care of business against an SMU team that right now is projected to get a bye, and for my money, is a lock to make the college football playoffs. Clemson at 17, Iowa State at 16, and this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because this is something that the college football committee has kind of been hinting at for a while. The winner of the Big 12 is not going to get that bye. Right now, the 2 teams that are the top ranked in the Big 12, 15 and 16, Arizona State and Iowa State. Those are the 2 highest ranked Big 12 teams. You've also got 2 others a little below them in BYU and Colorado, none of which have a real shot of making it in. But those teams aren't getting a bye. It's going to be a 12 seed for those teams, whichever one, Arizona State or Iowa State, whichever one ends up getting in there, that is going to be a 12 seed. And for all the people that have been talking about, the 5 seed has it easy. That's the easiest path. They're going to get to play a nobody, and then they're going to get to play the 4 seed, right? Because they don't reseed. This makes that path just a little bit more difficult. And I don't know if that is necessarily a good or bad thing. They're still going to have to play the Mountain West champ second, just as opposed to first. It makes that road probably just a little bit harder. Do I hate what's going on? No, I don't necessarily hate it. I also think that the Big 12 teams are objectively better, or at least Arizona State is objectively better than a Boise State team that, for all the good that Boise State has been, for how good Boise State has been all season long, you take a look at, how they've been performing as of late. And while they still have, one of the best players in the country in Ashton Genty, this team as of late has not been performing the way it was at the beginning of the season. I think that's really an interesting way of looking at things, where you're rewarding previous placement a lot more, which is kind of how it always goes. But I do think that Arizona State at least should have been ranked ahead of Boise State. That's just a small gripe, though, and that's my first one of here. This is where we get to the real bubble teams, though. Once we get past that 15 spot, that bubble block of Alabama, Miami, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. Those are the four bubble teams that we take a look at that were causing all the controversy. Miami, of course, takes their second loss in 3 games, second loss of the season, falls out of the college football playoffs. They're now the first team out behind an Alabama squad that gets in at the very end. I hate that. I absolutely hate that Alabama has found a way into the playoff yet again. If you're not playing in a college football championship game, you are most likely in as long as the favorite wins, which sucks which sucks because Alabama adds their record just does not deserve to get in. You take a look at an Alabama team that, well, yes, they have one acceptable loss to a Tennessee squad that's ranked all the way up at 7. They also have 2 losses that I cannot overlook. Yes, they beat Ole Miss. Yes, they beat they beat South Carolina. Yes, they beat Georgia, but they also lost to one of, if not the worst team in the entire SEC in Oklahoma that finished at 6-6, as well as a 6-6 Vandy, who I think Vandy deserves a little bit more respect, but that's still 2 really bad losses. When you're comparing that directly to Miami's resume, Miami might not have that key victory, but they lost to a good Georgia Tech squad and a Syracuse squad that is now finished in the top 25. Those are both losses that you look at and you say, yeah, I kind of understand. And I understand bad defense is bad, and that's not gonna help their case out here. But Miami, I think, also deserves to be in over Alabama. Behind them, Ole Miss, I don't think they really deserve a shot, but South Carolina is the team that I think should be in. You take a look at, again, I understand, losses to Ole Miss, losses to Alabama, but the way that the committee has kind of been treating things as of late is, what have you done for me lately? That's fine. That's how I think it should be done anyway, especially when we're looking at that final spot in the college football playoff. South Carolina has done everything you could have possibly asked for them to do. They beat the number 12 team in the nation last week in Clemson on the road on rivalry weekend. Lenore Sellers has been playing like one of the best players in all of the country right now. And yes, they lost to Alabama. It's true. They lost to Ole Miss. All 3 of South Carolina losses, including the one to LSU, were good losses. In fact, they should not have lost that game to LSU. There was a mistake, a pick 6 that was called back that eventually led to an LSU victory that would have flipped the game. That's a 14-point swing right there. That instead of losing by 3, they probably win that game by at least 4 points. If that pick 6 isn't called back on a mistake that the SEC later said, my bad, guys, we messed up. That shouldn't have been the way it was called. That took South Carolina out of the playoffs right there, and I don't understand how more people aren't talking about this. The Alabama game, they probably should have won that game. Couple bad decisions, a missed field goal at the end after recovering an onside kick. They end up losing that one. That one I don't really have too many gripes with. And of course, they got destroyed by Ole Miss. But this is a South Carolina team that I think should absolutely be in with their resume. I don't believe Alabama is the better team than South Carolina. I also think Miami should be in ahead of Alabama. 2 losses against 2 good ACC schools should count more than 3 losses, 2 of them against bad SEC schools. But that's just my opinion. I don't hate the rest of this ranking. I think overall, they've basically narrowed in the right teams in the top 10, right? Oregon, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, Georgia, Ohio State, Tennessee, SMU, Indiana, Boise, and Arizona State. I think those 11 teams that are in the bracket right now are great, perfect. It's going to be that last team, that 11 seed, that bubble spot that is going to cause issues for everyone. And right now, it's Alabama's, and unless some craziness happens, they have basically locked up that spot. We'll talk more about that in the next segment coming up in just a second. But outside of that 11 seed, I think this is a solid ranking. There's just a couple things I would change on the bubble. But let me know what you think of these college football playoff rankings. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we take a look at all the different scenarios for the 12 teams in and around the college football playoffs, how they could get in, how they could find their way out, and what it looks like in the most chaotic scenario yet. We'll talk about all of that and more coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.